Let me start off by saying that this is a story that I have never told anybody. This encounter happened in the woods of southern New Jersey. My girlfriend, her sister Shelley, her boyfriend Craig, and I decided to take a 2-day camping trip in the woods. It was an hour drive from our apartment in Philadelphia without traffic, so we woke up early in the morning to beat the traffic and to avoid a 3.5-hour drive. We arrived in Burlington, New Jersey, and stopped off at the Acme grocery store and bought chicken, bread, hot dogs, a case of water, and a few other snacks for us to live off for the 2-day adventure. We took a back road towards the rural area of the country which was close to the military base. We arrived at our destination and wasted no time getting out of the car. The area was a wasteland, no cars passing the turnoff, and nobody parked anywhere. Nothing at all. It was completely quiet. I immediately got the feeling of dread, but tried to suppress it to prevent ruining our trip. We spent the next half hour finding a perfect spot to set up our camp. We ended up picking a spot near a clearing that was by a service road and a line of telephone poles. We set up camp as nightfall came quick. My girlfriend and her sister set up the tent as me and Craig built the fire and put chairs around the fire. By the time we were finished, it was already 9 p.m. Since we arrived around roughly 7 p.m. As we sat around the fire, I got up to take a piss behind a tree about 20 yards behind the tent. As I was doing my business, the woods fell dead silent. All activity was gone. No crickets or bird calls, just complete silence. I began to get that feeling of dread again. As I finished up, I began to feel a presence, as if something was watching me. I walked back to the campsite and asked them if they noticed how the area suddenly fell silent. They looked at me like I was crazy and brushed it off as a common trait of the wilderness. We set out talking and laughing until about 12 midnight. Then we hid the tent for the night. I laid next to my girlfriend, closest to the mesh window, which was open. After about 30 minutes of just lying there, I began to doze off. I was just about to fall asleep until I was startled by a deer running at full speed through our campsite. At the time, it didn't seem too odd, so I just brushed it off, thinking it ran through here fast just to avoid contact with us. After calming down from the sudden rush of adrenaline, I finally managed to fall back asleep. At about 2:30 a.m., I was awoken by my girlfriend, who was frantically shaking me. She was bug-eyed and pale as snow. I sat up trying to calm her down to find out what the problem was. At this point, Shelley and Craig were wide awake, confused about the whole commotion going on. My girlfriend finally calmed down and began to tell me that something was moving around off into the woods, letting off growls. My first initial thought was that it was a bear she heard. Craig and myself grabbed our guns and exited the tent and walked around the perimeter. The woods was still dead silent. We walked around for about 15 minutes, and after finding nothing, we headed back to the tent and told the girls that it was nothing more than a deer passing through the area. We all managed to fall asleep, but I was awoken 20 minutes later to sounds off in the brush. It sounded like something walking back and forth off in the trees. I looked out the mesh window, but saw nothing, just darkness. I woke Craig up quietly to avoid waking up the girls. I told him about the sounds I was hearing off in the brush. We sat there, just listening. It sounded like it was about 15 yards away, and it was inching closer. That's when we heard the grunts. These were deep, guttural, aggressive grunts. Whatever this thing was, it was big. The footsteps sounded as if it was on 2 feet, so at first I thought it was a homeless man or a hermit drunk off his ass. Soon after that thought, the sounds stopped. Everything was quiet once again. At this moment, I grabbed my Glock 17 semi-automatic pistol and cocked it back and laid back down. Soon after that, that's when it happened. We were all hit by a blood-curdling roar. This roar was so loud and strong, I felt my organs vibrating. The girls were immediately awoken by the roar, and it stopped as soon as it started. I was insanely terrified at this point. In the midst of this creature roaring, I subconsciously grabbed my gun, and I was gripping it tightly with a death grip. Craig went outside of the tent first, while my girlfriend and Shelley closed the mesh windows. I got out of the tent and I was hit with a gut-wrenching smell. It was horrible. My stomach began to turn as I fought the urge to puke. I smell it as I'm typing this right now. We began to walk around the edge of the woods without guns fixed on the darkness, not knowing what the hell's out there. I reached the spot where I'd previously took a leak, and just then, a tree branch came flying over our heads, crushing into the chairs where the fire was. Then once again, a loud roar. This one lasted a lot shorter than the last one. Craig immediately began to fire his gun in the direction of the roar, with me soon joining him. I fired 3 shots and stopped when I saw Craig stop. We heard fast-paced, heavy footsteps coming towards us. I took 10 steps back, turned around, and ran back to the tent where the girls were. I told them we need to get out of here. Immediately, I looked up from the tent and saw Craig staring into the brush, while slowly walking backwards towards us. I looked into the same direction as he was, and that's when I saw it. Standing about 8.5 feet tall was this huge, dark figure. This thing was muscular. There was enough moonlight breaking through the trees to see the definitions of its arms and chest. It was all black with shiny black fur. It had red, glowing eyes. I pushed the girls back inside the tent and told them to shut it. I looked out back over the tent, and it was staring right at me, while Craig was standing right next to me. At this moment, I made the biggest mistake. I sat there, staring right into its eyes for about 10 seconds, as it let off another roar. My body trembled with fear, but was soon replaced with adrenaline and anger. I raised my gun and aimed it at the creature's chest. Craig immediately put his hand on my shoulder, telling me, "I don't think that gun is big enough." It then hit me. He was right. This thing was the size of a linebacker on steroids. The creature then started to motion towards us. I fired in its direction to warn it to not come any closer, but it ignored it. I fired a second time, with no success. I then got agitated and fired 3 shots at this thing's chest. All 3 hit this creature in the chest. I'm a marksman with 83% accuracy rate, so I know for a fact that I hit this thing. The creature then scrunched its face and gave a growl. At this point, it was standing in the open and was illuminated by the moonlight. I got a clear look at this thing. It had the face of a human, but it had no neck. Its head connected right at its shoulders. It again began to motion towards us. I reloaded my gun and raised it. Craig then also raised his .45 automatic pistol. I began to yell at this thing to not come any closer. It was about 15 yards away when it began to growl again, and Craig fired 6 shots at this thing. I joined him and let off 5 shots at its chest once again. It then stumbled back, fell to the ground, and took off into the woods. I wasted no time grabbing the girls and telling them we needed to go now. Luckily, the car was only about 50 yards from our campsite. We ran through the bush at full speed. I could hear something keeping pace with us off in the distance on our left side, so I began to fire into that direction while running like my life depended on it. I kept my girlfriend to the right of me until we finally reached the car. She threw me the keys and I hopped in, started the car, and peeled out of there, speeding down the dirt track towards the main road. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw this thing gaining on us. I put the pedal to the floor and was doing 70 down the dirt road. It was about 50 or 60 yards behind us, keeping pace until it suddenly stopped and turned off back into the woods. I reached the service road and turned left without checking for any cars. I drove straight home after this. The car ride was silent until Craig burgered asking, "What in the bloody hell was that thing?" Shelley then replied saying it was a bear. I immediately shut that down by explaining to her the description of this thing. Her eyes grew wide. Since that day, I've never gone camping, and I don't plan on doing so ever again. This experience has left me traumatized. I, to this day, have nightmares about that creature. I did research and saw that Bigfoot matched the description of this creature to a T. I thought Bigfoot was a little far-fetched, but I had no idea what this thing could have been. To this day, all I can say was, thank goodness I had Craig with me, and that we were armed. I have now become a full believer of Bigfoot after this encounter. I had my deer, my kill, stolen by a beast I did not even notice was literally 50 to 60 yards away from me while hunting outside of Hobart Bay, Alaska. I was born and raised in Oregon, Salem to be exact. I am an avid hunter and outdoorsman, if you will. And what I saw blew me away, and it changed my life for good in some ways. I am a business owner in Salem, Oregon, where I was born and raised. It is not often that I share this encounter because I do not want to ruin my business, but I figured if my name is kept out of it, I could share it with you guys. I love to hunt and fish. Bear, elk, cougar, pronghorn in eastern Oregon, you name it. I love to hunt and fish. As a matter of fact, up until the day or event in my life, I had hunted all over the United States. Alaska was the next destination. I am telling you, I could have had my own Netflix show like the Meat Eater guy. It was a year of overpopulation back in the mid-90s, but my friend called me to inform me that there were going to be extra out-of-state tags given for hunting Sitka black-tailed deer. Apparently, there was a population explosion, and it was becoming a nuisance to locals throughout the southern part of Alaska. So with that good news and cheaper tags I was going to visit my good friend for a 4 to 5 day hunt around Hobart Bay, Alaska that year. My favorite thing to hunt is deer. I know for some it seems like the most boring, as it is not as dangerous as a mountain lion or a bear. Personally, I like deer because they really are hard to hunt, especially as a bow hunter. I have to get closer, which means the bow hunter has to be stealthier. I would fly into Alaska where my buddy would pick me up, and we would stay at his cabin just on the outskirts of a little old sleepy logging town called Hobart Bay. Personally, today I think the main industry of that town is tourism, as I believe the logging industry has been closed down. Fishing, hunting, hiking, and basically just all the outdoor sports and recreation you could think of is available there. I still go back there even after seeing this animal I never really believed existed come out of the brush and steal my kill that day. But let me tell you everything that happened and exactly what I saw and experienced that day. Jack's cabin was a 2-bedroom, 1 large living room and open kitchen log cabin. To tell you the truth, it was a little swanky for a hunter who lived in the wilds of Alaska. Then again, Jack was married and his wife liked the swanky feel. They were both actually early retirees from Idaho originally. They hit the jackpot with some work at a home-based business they had for 12 years, and still to this day collect a very large monthly income from it. But in the end, Jack and his wife loved the country life, and that is the one thing they always wanted to do, to live in Alaska in a cabin once their son and daughter were off to college. I loved it there too. The hunting trip was the first of many I would go on with Jack, and that second bedroom would become a second home for me over time. Just so you know, I did marry myself, but she passed away before our 10th anniversary from cancer. I never remarried, even to this day. By the time this incident happened, she had been gone for 4 years, and yes, I was still feeling the pain and loss pretty badly. It was nice to get out of Salem and into a cabin up in Alaska at the time. It was nearing that time of year, and I think you know what I'm referring to, the anniversary, and I simply did not want to be alone. Arriving at the cabin was really a breath of fresh air, and as you can tell, was much needed. Jack and his wife helped me get settled in that late afternoon I arrived. It was, of course, a little too late for hunting that day, and the trip was long, so we simply enjoyed playing catch-up with our lives that evening over dinner and dessert. The conversation on the porch later that evening would turn into hunting the Sitka black-tailed deer. We also talked about safety with so many bears around. While Hobart Bay is small, and where we would hunt about 10 miles southeast, there were bears everywhere all the time. We would, of course, be strapped with large caliber handguns as well as bear spray. Funny thing was, who would have thought that Bigfoot spray would be something I would need instead? I know they don't make it, it was just a bit of humor and sarcasm all at the same time. It is not the subject that never came up in my life. As a matter of fact, I had a couple of friends down in southern Oregon who had come across what they believed was Bigfoot, and one of them was in law enforcement down there. He watched as it took down a deer. He will share that with you soon. I never was thoroughly convinced of its existence, but I did leave room for it, and even thought about it. When I was out hunting, it's not like I never looked for more than deer track while I was out there. Hey, you never know, right? But I know you want the encounter, not all that other stuff that leads up to it. I just wanted you to know why I was up there in the first place and how this truly shaped my life moving forward. The sighting and encounter did not last long, so I will try to keep it as short as possible. Truth be told, the event or incident took no longer than 35 to 40 seconds tops. However, it felt like minutes passed by instead. I guess when you see something like that, time just gets lost, I suppose. Where we were hunting was more or less a high country type of landscape. There are quite a few different types of landscapes in Alaska, and here it was the smaller coniferous trees that dotted the land, but it was the tall, thick brush that cut down on visibility. Here you had to take the high ground to hunt, or you could not be able to see a thing hardly. Of course, finding high ground in Alaska, even around the salt chuck, was not all that complicated. When we arrived, I told Jack how right he was. This part of Alaska was really beautiful. It was so beautiful, in fact, I started thinking I could live here, and even daydreamed about it for a while hunting that morning. It was just getting light, and the low-lying hills were shadowed by a mountain range to the east. We walked to the bush about 200 yards or so beyond the dirt road we parked on. Actually, every road there was dirt at the time, and so were most of the little town of Hobart Bay. We decided to spread out, so I walked west about another 200 yards and settled in for what I hoped would be a decent day of hunting, or what some call patiently waiting. Armed with my bow and a small bag of food and one tall thermos of coffee, I finally found a little knoll, with the perfect view of the valley below. Looking around, there were a ton of deer sign, so the prospects were great, I thought. At one point, I believe I saw some black bear tracks on the way in, but things were still damp from the rain earlier that morning, so I could not be sure. They were fresh tracks, so I would keep myself aware. I poured a cup of coffee and got settled in near a little rocky outcropping, and then took up my binoculars to get a better lay of the land below. There was a light fog through the small valley below, but nothing that was hindering my view within the range of my bow. Nothing. I saw nothing and heard nothing but the birds chirping for 2 hours. Twice I had to relieve myself of the coffee I was drinking, and usually as a hunter, you would just let it go without moving much. However, because there was nothing around apparently, I decided to jump over to a nearby tree and real quick to relieve myself. Impressions, again. I was peeing when I noticed more of those large bear impressions about 3 or 4 feet to the right of me near the trees. They were long, wide, and because of the heavy rain later in the night, or earlier that morning, I had the feeling that it came through here not even an hour or 2 ago. With that revelation, I decided to radio over to Jack, at least to let him know. Better to be safe than sorry. The impressions led from south to north, basically over the edge of the knoll I was on, and down into the small valley below. I guess we were not the only hunters/predators out there that morning. I got back to my spot, and that is when Jack radioed me back, telling me that he had not seen a thing all morning and wanted to know if I wanted to move down to the road about 3 miles away. He said there was a nice little ravine almost overlooking the same valley below. Only a better view, as the ravine was higher and the game trails were plenty. Of course, game trails were the magic phrase for me. That did it. 20 minutes later, we were pulling over and packing our hunting equipment to a new spot. We were patient hunters, trust me, but when it's just dead with no moving around, it's time to move. We were there to hunt, not drink coffee and eat sandwiches all day. There was another but larger rocky outcropping in the section of the ridge. This one stretched for about 30 or 40 yards, so he took one side and I took the other. I would keep my line of sight and area northwest, and he would face the northeast, and from time to time we would agree to look dead center. This area had taller trees and more of them, and thicker brush. However, the brush was not as tall, so seeing something moving through would be easier. However, what I was about to see, well, I wish sometimes I could unsee, but then again, other times I'm feeling rather lucky to have witnessed such a creature. After about 20 minutes, Jack decided to move further down, about another 45 to 50 yards, putting him then about 150 or so yards away. More game trails equaled more sign, and that more sign equaled more movement, and not even 25 minutes into our own move to the new location, it was a few or so females and the young, more or less small herd. It would not be long now, as every hunter knows, bucks follow the hinds and they're usually not too far behind. I started to get real excited and settled in a bit. I drew my bow out and made sure I was ready to let an arrow fly. Another 15 minutes and finally, through a small clearing, I saw the first buck of the day. Well, late morning by then. It was a 4-point buck, I could see. I was approximately 25 yards away, where he came, a heavy thicket of bush and smaller short pines, and a few taller black pines. As a bow hunter, even if you are using feeders, you are never more than around 30 yards away from your kill zone. That golden brown and perfect Sitka black deer had come into almost full view at that point. I settled down, relaxed a bit, and breathed in and out once or twice as usual, and took aim. Right above the front shoulder, that was the usual placement. Right above the front shoulder, that was the usual placement, and the best really for any bow hunter. The arrow is in the air, and a split second later, it was a great shot. The deer jumped and spun around, and before then it hit a tree and fell down. I did not stand up yet. Actually, I fell to both knees and watched as it slowly stopped moving. And that is when I heard something massive crashing through the bush, and shrieks from about 20 yards or so from the north side of where the deer now laid next to a black pine. Enormous, massive, and downright scary looking, from what I could tell. I knew right out the gate that I was looking at a Bigfoot. It was fast too. It came out of the brush and was on all fours. In front of the deer before I knew it, there it was, a myth, a legend, alive before my eyes. It was a brownish color. The hair, that is, and no, it was not fur. It looked like hair to me. Of course, there was still some brush in the way, but I could see that this thing had to be on all fours. That was what was so amazing and scary. To be on all fours like that. Well, if it were a bear, even a large one, I would not be able to see much of it behind that low brush like that, especially when on all fours. The head was not totally cone-shaped, but there was a bit of a shape to it. The hair, like I said, was more of a brownish color, but not dark brown, more like that deer, but only a few shades darker. I could not get a real sense of its face, other than it was darker and almost a dark gray cover tone to it. For the most part, all I could see was massive amounts of hair covering a huge monster of the woods. It was muscular and had broad shoulders. If I had to guess, I would put that thing about 4 feet wide at the chest, nearly 9 feet tall, and had to weigh at least 500 pounds. It stood up with my deer in both of its large hands. At this moment, I got a sense that this Bigfoot was, at all of that, 8 to 9 feet in height. Anyways, it had my kill in its hands and then snap. A cracking or breaking noise could be heard from where it was at. I watched as the creature literally and practically ripped the head off the deer as easily as you could twist a cap off of a beer. Next, it looked back the way it had come and made a short whistle sound. What freaked me out at that point was the fact that a whistle came back. There were more than one of these things. It looked around, even in my direction for a moment, and still as a church mouse in the dark. It looked back to where the other whistle came from, tossed the deer over its shoulder, and with one arm, and with the longest strides I'd ever seen, disappeared into the thick brush and trees. I packed up a few things that were out of my backpack, and made my way quietly back towards Jack. I am not sure if he would believe me, But either way, I wanted to be as far away from here as I could at that moment. Jack was not surprised, but I was because of his lack of being surprised. The conversation never came up because he thought I would never have believed him about his own sighting 4 years earlier. It was further north of Hobart Bay, and he had one nonetheless. I joked with him about being upset for a minute, but what had just happened as we drove away was scary and amazing all at once. Jack's description was almost spot on with mine, even down to the color of the thing. However, his happened while fishing in a stream. It was scooping up fish out of the stream and eating them until it was noticed. At that point, it walked off and disappeared into the woods as well. Well, at least I know I was not seeing things. Since then, I've hunted in Hobart Bay, hoping I would get a chance to see this giant thing of a creature again. Well, as long as it was at least from 30 yards away for sure. I also do a little research from time to time myself in Oregon. This sighting changed me and my beliefs about what is out there in the Pacific Northwest after all.